to help us celebrate this, we invited 3 speakers from Latin America, 3 scholars that are very prominent in their respective national arenas. Our first speaker is Professor Cecilia Coelho from Brazil. She has a bachelor's degree in mathematics and philosophy from the University of Brasilia, a master in philosophy with a thesis on the Sophist Gorgias from the University of Sao Paulo, and a PhD in classical literature from the University of Sao Paulo with a dissertation on rhetoric and philosophy in the tragedy of Euripides. She is currently a senior postdoctoral student at the Federal University of Minas Gerais in the Department of Classical Literature. She is Brazil's representative on the Executive Council of the Latin American Rhetoric Association. Our second speaker, Professor Alejandra Vitale, received her PhD in linguistics at the University of Buenos Aires, where she now serves as an adjunct professor. She is the author of The Study of Science, Hurst and Saussure, and co-author of the case Retro-Discursive Approach. She has been visiting professor at the University of Campinas in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and at UNAM, Mexico, and at the University of Texas, El Paso, in the United States. At present, Professor Vitale co-directs a research project funded by the University of Buenos Aires, where she's undergoing a comparative discourse analysis of coups in Argentina and Uruguay. Professor Vitale is a member of the Executive Council of the Latin American Rhetoric Association. Again, this association was established just this March in 2010 in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Professor Vitale was the prime organizer of this conference, and also was the first national conference of rhetoric studies in Argentina. So she was the head of this very important event. She's currently serving as president of the Argentine Rhetoric Association, again, a group that was also formed at this conference in March. Our third speaker, unfortunately, couldn't make it. She had an unforeseen event occur, so she couldn't be here with us. I will be taking her role and reading her paper to you today. So again, you have to forgive me for that if anything should happen. But Professor Mariana Osuna Castañeda holds a PhD in literature from the College of Philosophy and Literature of the UNAM. Professor Osuna has been a professor in the Hispanic Literature Department since 2000. She has completed 2 postdoctoral research projects, one at Mexico's National Library, another at the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies. She was a member of the Institute for Philological Research's editorial team of Mexican writer and political journalist José Joaquín Fernández de Lizardi's work. Some of you may or may not know Fernández de Lizardi's most famous work, which is often translated in English into The Mangy Parrot. Was written in 1816, is often considered the first novel written and published in Latin America. Professor Mariana Osuna has published several articles about 19th century Mexican literature and press related to rhetoric. Nowadays, she's dedicated to genre theory as well as to rhetoric, intellectual history, and printing culture applied to Mexican and Latin American literature. She herself belongs to the Mexican National Research Association, a system of researchers, and she's level 1. That's a pretty high category for investigator researcher in Mexico. She's also a member of the Executive Council of the Latin American Association of Rhetoric. So the order will be very simple. Our first speaker will be Professor Cecilia Coelho from Brazil. Our second speaker will be Professor Alejandra Vitale from Argentina, and then I will take the third slot here, speaking for Mariana Osuna from Mexico, the National University, Autonomous University of Mexico. So please help me by welcoming our speakers with a nice round of applause, and while Professor Coelho please comes up to the podium.
I'd like to thank Caneda dos Santos for the invitation and the kindness receiving us. To thank Tulip University for its support, and to thank Daniel Yankin, a friend who helped me with my written English, and to thank you for being here. Brazil between rhetoric and theory, consideration on the study of rhetoric. The development of rhetorical studies in Brazil is closely linked to the history of education in a country living under Portuguese colonial rule. From the discovery of Brazil in the 16th century until the end of the 18th century, Brazil lived the experience of colonization. During this time, it was the Company of Jesus that undertook the task of teaching, which in the beginning consisted of the catechism of the Aboriginal people living in the country. This meant that Portugal did not develop an official policy of education in Brazil, and that the education provided by the Jesuits served as a set of purpose complementary and supportive of the Portuguese expansion. The early schools were founded in 1549 by Jesuits led by Father Manuel da Nóbrega. Later on, in Bahia, Espírito Santo, and São Paulo, seminars and colleges were created, and Latin was the main medium of communication. At this stage, teaching and education functioned not only to educate priests, but also to educate people operating in secular roles, such as lawyers, at a level comparable to that provided by the Portuguese crown. Although information on the functioning of these schools remains scarce, it is well known that the educational program followed the Ratio Studiorum, a set of norms and rules followed by the Jesuit establishment. This document, published in 1599, was made against the background of the Protestant Reformation and the expansion of Lutheranism in Europe. In Brazil, some change in this program occurred. One such change was the introduction of the study of the Tupi language in place of Greek, because it was considered essential to communicate in the language of the Indians that the Church wished to convert. Training in humanities and letters encompassed the areas of grammar, rhetoric, and the humanities based on Greek and Roman authors, such as Cicero, Virgil, Catullus, Ovidio, Horace, Aristotle, Plato, Demosthenes, Homer, and Hesiod. The best known and probably the most active educator of that time was José Anchieta, who was rector of the Espírito Santo College and authored the volume The Art of Grammar, dealing with the language most used along the Brazilian coastline, printed in Coimbra in 1595. The scarcity of official schools in the colonial period allowed the Church to assume a leading position in education, and even laymen were accepted in seminaries, as was the case with the Mariana Seminar, created in 1750. Attendees could undertake training in letters and philosophy, considered secondary ones, while theology and sacred science were taught at the higher level for the preparation for priests. In the diploma of letter, I'm calling here letter the belles lettres, areas of study include Latin grammar, the humanities, and rhetoric, whilst in philosophy, areas of study could include logic, metaphysics, morality, mathematics, physical, and natural science. Those who want to and were able to, or could afford to, continue their studies, especially in medicine and law, would travel to Europe, and the University of Coimbra in Portugal was the more sought-after institution. We should note here that the University of Coimbra was also strongly influenced by the Jesuits, for entry to the university required prior study at the university's Royal College of Arts, which had been under the guidance of the Jesuits since 1555. The supremacy ascribed to verbal and written communication was a classical heritage that best served the purpose of training good preachers and great Christian orators. Most of the scholarly program of the Jesuits rested on the study of rhetoric, and especially on the study of Aristotelian works, with a strong accent or strongly influenced by Cicero and Quintilian. In classes on rhetoric, the Caesarean ideal of being a good orator was supplemented by the pedagogy of theatrical activity. A good orator had to be a good actor. It was up to the master of rhetoric to prepare the students for the apex of their instruction: dramatic representations and solemn declamations. Among the most renowned Jesuits is Father Antonio Vieira, who has also been referred to as the Emperor of Portuguese language. It's important to note not only the influence of Vieira's work on the educational and political development of the Brazilian intelligentsia up to the end of the 19th century, but also that one of the strongest and most consolidated areas of research within the field of rhetoric in Brazilian universities is based on the study of his work until now. For roughly 210 years, the Jesuits were the moving force behind the educational system in Brazil, directly or indirectly. In 1759, for political and economical reasons, the Jesuits were expelled from all the Portuguese colonies, a decision made by the Marquis of Pombal, the Portuguese Prime Minister. Their possessions at that point in time included 25 residents, 36 missions, and 17 colleges and seminars, with courses in philosophy, rhetoric, and theology, alongside the minor seminars and beginners' school, which would be located in any town with a Jesuit presence. The total number of Jesuits expelled from Brazil were 509, from Bahia, Pernambuco, Rio de Janeiro, and Pará. Through a decree of the Marquis of Pombal, dated from 1759, Jesuit schools in Portugal and throughout the colonies were suppressed. In Portugal, the oratory congregation replaced the Jesuits. The base subjects being taught remained the same, but now with a strong emphasis on rhetoric and Latin. A more substantial change took place in the teaching method. You have in the handout the name of Luiz Antônio Verney, who wrote a book, O Verdadeiro Método de Estudar. The new educational method was presented at the Opus, The True Method of Study, by Verney, published in 1746. Verney criticized, for instance, the bad taste and the excess presented in the sermons and public speaks of the period. To Verney, rhetoric should be considered part of any activity involving relationships between men at any social level, and that, therefore, eloquence and the abuse of erudition should be combated. In Brazil, the question was how to replace 2 centers of Jesuit organization and influence. Schools were created to teach Latin, Greek, and rhetoric. However, they did not function well because there was no supporting structure in place and because the school depended really